2007 to 9, got it, being recorded, as Senior Vice Provost for the State University of New York system, and that's all the campuses, not just one, so it seems like a big task. In 2009, she moved back to UGA as an administrator, and she's been in several different administrative posts since, first at UGA, and then since 2016 at Georgia State. Professor Pandit served as president of the AAG in 2006 to 7, and previously she had served as president of CDAG, Southeast Division of AAG, from 1997 to 1999. Professor Pandit's research has primarily been in the area of regional science, population, and economic geography, with research on migration, immigration, labor markets, and fertility, emphasizing quantitative methods and modeling. And for fun, I found her first peer-reviewed article, which came out in Economic Geography in 1986, when she was still a PhD student in the department. It was titled Sectoral Allocation of Labor Force with Development and the Effect of Trade Activity. And the paper, quote, utilized Cassetti's expansion method, unquote, to investigate how the size and nature of trade activity impacts labor force transformation across 68 countries. And among the many contributions of Professor Pandit's wider research program was to show that a focus on patterns, processes, and experiences in the Global South could inform geography's conceptual constructs, particularly around the idea of the region. And this is an issue we continue to address in this department regarding particular our world regional geography course. But as her career took her into administration, so did her writing and presentations. She's contributed on issues such as internationalization of the university, diversity, and one of her very recent articles about mentoring graduate students in an era of faculty career restructuring. And she's also a certified executive coach. Professor Pandit has received many awards recognizing her contributions to geography. I'll name just a few. She was one of the inaugural class of AAG Fellows in 2018. She's received the AAG's Ron F. Abler Distinguished Service Award. She's been given the Lifetime Achievement Award from both the Population Specialty Group of the AAG and the Southeastern Division of the AAG. And from her history as an OSU graduate student to her current role as a senior administrator, all as an international woman of color, I think Professor Pandit has a unique perspective to share on the academy. And I hope you're all able to not only hear her talk, but to participate in the discussion afterwards. So please join me in welcoming Professor Pandit to give this Robinson lecture on the restructuring of faculty careers, trends, issues, and models for the future. So welcome, Kavita Pandit.
Becky, what an absolutely fabulous introduction. Thank you so much. And Darla and Ohio State, thank you for inviting me to deliver this Robinson lecture. I too had hoped that I'd be strolling down the Oval to Derby Hall to see all of you in person and try to hunt for my old office, which I'm told is no longer even around. Because of the restructuring of Derby Hall. But I am glad to be joining virtually, and it also allows some of my friends from graduate school days to join. And a quick shout out to Jenny Zorn and Betsy Ross, Elizabeth Evelay, who is also on this call. So I'm delighted. So let me get started by sharing my screen. Mode. All okay, Becky?
Yes, looks great.
Awesome. So the topic for today's lecture really has a genesis in the last 5 years of my, it's been throughout my career, I've been engaged with faculty issues, but really in the last 5 years, I've been seeing these changes firsthand. And the restructuring to which I refer is I'm going to try and move here we go. This restructuring to which I refer is really well known. It's a relative decline in the number of tenure track faculty over the last 3 or 4 decades, really since the time I left grad school to come down to Georgia. And also the rise in non-tenure track faculty lines, both short-term, part-time, and full-time. And I've really become interested in digging into this. So in this, 40 minutes or 30 to 40 minutes, I'd like to share a little bit of what the factors behind this restructuring is, maybe speculate a little bit from the vantage point I have had as to what might be ahead. Some of it that I'm observing, some of it maybe just my own ideas, and end with possibly a few takeaways, both for grad students as well as faculty on the call. So flash back to the 1980s at Ohio State. On the left is me in the graduate carrel with my beloved major professor, Emilio Cassetti. Becky, thank you for mentioning him, late Emilio Cassetti. And at the right is Aisha John, one of my fellow grad students on the left, and me outside of Derby Hall. And again, my memories of Derby Hall are very different from the reality today, but I do remember if you go up that short flight of steps, there was like a quadrangle with a little closed off courtyard that you could never enter. And in one of those corners was a Robinson cartography lab, and next to it was our graduate carrels, a picture on the left. And that was perhaps my closest connection to cartography, other than bopping in there every so often to see my friend Liz, who's on the call, who was a cartography student. But to the point, for those of us who are interested in academic careers, like Aisha in the photo and me and Jenny on the call, the rules were simple, publish a few papers, get some teaching under your belt, and you're well positioned to secure a tenure track job. And the only question was, would it be at a research institution or would it be at a teaching institution? That really was the only big question for us. And all of us, most of us got a tenure track job. This expectation wasn't out of line. And, maybe a couple of students sometimes graduated a little later, took a one-year teaching gig before landing a tenure track position. So that was really the norm. And it wasn't just because we were from Ohio State, although I'm sure that had a big reason for it. Across the nation and certainly across geography, as this study by Phil Suckling in the early 1990s showed, the vast majority of faculty openings in geography, as advertised in the AG newsletter, were tenure track faculty positions. And in his study, only 17% were what he called temporary. We didn't really have a language of adjunct or part-time or full-time. It was really temporary faculty positions. So this was not an unusual situation to be in. Graduate student entering the labor market today, or the faculty academic labor market today, see a slightly different situation because things have changed. On the left, you sort of see the relative numbers of tenure track versus non-tenure track positions, tenure eligible, and that share has been dropping. This is not just geography. This is not even just research universities. This is higher ed taken together. So that tenure track share of tenure track positions has been declining. Non-tenure track positions has been growing. And on the right, you also see the rise in the relative numbers of part-time faculty that are teaching a course here and a course there, and a relative decline in full-time faculty positions, whether they are tenure line or not. And this is a fundamental shift that now characterizes the labor market for incoming graduate students. So with that quick sort of setup, what I'd like to go through in the remaining time is first to talk about what has come to be the conventional model of faculty appointments. This sort of tenure track position that I just assumed I was going to go into, I kind of call that a conventional model. What is it? And how did it get established? I'd like to talk then about the restructuring of these faculty appointment types and these new kinds of alternative positions that are growing very rapidly and what they look like. And then wrap up with just emerging trends, speculations, models, and takeaways. I sort of threw a lot into the end there. So let's begin with this, what I've called the conventional faculty model, which is based upon, I would say, two pillars. One is the idea of tenure, faculty tenure. And the idea of tenure, which is a kind of a well-accepted and almost bedrock of academia today, was first articulated in that very specific way by an AAUP statement in 1940s that talked about what tenure is. And very simply put, the idea of tenure is that all faculty, after navigating a kind of a probationary period, would be given a lifetime appointment that could be terminated only for egregious behavior or for cause. That's sort of the bottom line. And the reasons why this quickly picked up and was really important, or the idea of tenure was rooted in, first, academic freedom, the need for faculty to have academic freedom in their research and teaching. And you recall that the time, 1940s was somewhere in between what has come to be called the Red Scare after the Bolshevik Revolution and formation of the Soviet Union. We're talking 100 years ago now. And then between that and McCarthyism that arose in the 1950s, and the need for faculty to have complete freedom to speak and write and do research without that sort of political waves and influences was one of those reasons. The other that is less kind of referenced or known, but certainly is part of that 1940 statement, is that tenure would provide the economic security to draw people into the teaching profession. It would make it literally attractive to men and women of ability. And here too, the context is really important because right around in the post-World War II eras, we saw a huge influx of veterans from World War II flooding into universities under the GI Bill. And there was a fear that we would not have enough faculty. And then soon after, just a couple of decades later, there was the huge baby boom entering college years. So the idea of tenure as a means of attracting faculty to the institution was as important as that academic freedom piece. And not surprisingly, by 1970s, this really began to be cemented, the idea of tenure, and most institutions offered tenure or tenure track positions. The other building block or pillar of the conventional model is this tripartite workload. For a long time, faculty kind of just did teaching. It really wasn't defined. Yeah, you did research on the side and engage your scholarly side, and service was very much tied together with your teaching, advising, supervising student residence halls, admissions. This was all part of the faculty workload. But really in that sort of post-World War II years, we began to see research begin to be defined much more specifically. And as the picture on the right, I included to highlight one of the reasons for this. In that sort of lead up to World War II, years after, faculty got very engaged in this preparation for war and in the research and research done during that time. This is Berkeley scientists at the Lawrence Livermore lab. I guess I'm told it's a cyclotron according to Google. So there was defense research, the idea that US position in the world would depend upon research. And therefore, with the growth of federal funding for research that followed into the 40s, 50s, 60s, and onwards, we began to see universities begin to define research as a piece of the workload of their faculty. An interesting side note here, Arthur Robinson, whom this lecture is named, was one of those scholars who did participate in that US defense effort through the mapping, through using his mapping skills. He was still a graduate student at Ohio State at that time. And in the early 40s, he was involved with various offices in the government doing this research. And then in the latter part of the 1940s, of course, he joined University of Wisconsin as a new assistant professor. And of course, he was one of those newest entrants to this, what we now call the conventional model of faculty workload, tripartite workload. So here we are, we have this conventional model. You get a tenure track position, you do teaching, research, and service, and some kind of share. And now, come the 1990s onward, and you see a number of sort of transforming forces come into play. The first of these, as we are all familiar with, was the financial crisis in higher ed, which sort of really initially hit public higher ed the most. And beginning in the late 1990s, public universities began to experience a significant disinvestment from their state governments. A key reason for this, there's so many, there's such a rich background to this, but for state governments, at this time, they were faced with very high costs of healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid. They were also faced with very high costs of state pension systems. So then the choice was, either we cut K through 12 or cut higher ed. And the appetite for cutting K through 12 then or now is very, very low for legislators. So higher ed was the one that took the brunt of those cuts. This was happening at the same time the costs of energy were rising. So university were grappling with that. Universities were grappling with greater regulation, Title IX, research compliance, reporting on students. So there was a whole new administrative cadre of administrators that was also coming in. So all of a sudden, these long-term inflexible investments in tenure track or tenured faculty began to be looked at and began to be scaled back. So this was sort of one of the very important transforming forces that are rising around that time. Also, interestingly, this was the time when we saw a huge influx, 80s, 90s onwards, of new groups of students entering college for the very first time. The Pell Grant, which was set up, I think in the 1970s, there was 72, made it possible for minorities and first-generation students to have greater access to affordable higher ed, and they started entering in great numbers, as did non-traditional students. And particularly in 2009, after the recession, we saw a huge surge of new sort of students of non-traditional age looking to retool their skills and entering higher ed. Accompanying that was a growth in the types of institutions. There was a big growth in community colleges, technical schools, even online only, some of these for-profit schools. There was such a surge of diversity in higher ed institutions at this time. All this meant that the demand for faculty began to shift, and there began to be a greater demand for faculty with specialized skills, instructional faculty, but that were faculty that was skilled in perhaps online delivery, skilled in working with diverse students, who could give certain types of perhaps career types of courses. skilled in a range of different strategies, pedagogies. So we saw a shift in the nature of students, faculty that were where the demand grew. And a third transforming force was a huge rise in federal funding for research. Between 1990 and 2018, the funding for NIH, as you can see in that top green line, grew by 500%, and NSF's funding tripled. And it's not, rocket science to realize that for universities, this federal funding began to be such a huge revenue source to cover the losses, the decreases in state funding. It also, investing in research made you climb up the rankings, world rankings. There was a lot of incentive to engage, and huge research enterprises began to be built up, especially in research universities, but even in four-year comprehensive schools. And now, what does it mean for faculty? Well, more and more faculty began to move towards research, needing all these terms: research buyouts, course releases, replacement teaching. These are, terms we use very colloquially now, but they were not always in the academic lexicon. So as faculty got diverted, we needed short-term teaching needs to cover faculty that were in research, not permanently, but for short-term. And you can again see the demand for faculty began to shift again. So shifting to where things stand now, kind of digging a little bit more into those graphs I showed earlier. Now, if you look at numbers of faculty by these different appointment types, so I've got three categories: tenured and tenure track, the kind of what we call the conventional model, the full-time faculty that are not on the tenure track. They are sometimes called lecturers, clinical faculty, librarians, increasingly off tenure. And then these part-time faculty that I will call adjunct. That term is used very loosely, and depending on who uses it, I will use it to refer to the part-time faculty who don't have full-time positions or benefits. Note first that all categories of faculty are growing. I mean, there was no decline in any single faculty group. Indeed, that surge of students that have been coming in the 80s, 90s, through these new avenues. I mean, international students, I really haven't got into that, and them entering the workforce. All of this has led to an overall rise in demand in student enrollment and faculty numbers. So that is, I suppose, a good news. But of particular interest to see the difference in the rates. I mean, the tenure track faculty are growing at very slow rates. And it's the adjunct and part-time faculty that have really taken off. And the full-time non-tenure track faculty are slowly coming up. They've been sort of the most recent category of faculty that have grown. I'll also point out that all the numbers so far are aggregate across all institutions. And without spending too much time on this, it is important to note that the picture in research universities, four-year comprehensives and two-year colleges really isn't quite the same. And you can quickly see that although the general trends are the same in terms of a relative decline in tenure track faculty, you see that research universities have held on, I mean, really rely more on tenure track faculty, even though those shares have gone down. And two-year colleges have overwhelmingly staffed by part-time faculty. The tenure faculty is much smaller. And the four-year comprehensive falls somewhere in between. But the trend in the nature of appointments is really the same. And I'd like to talk a little bit about these new categories of faculty. Just who are they? So this fastest growing category, the part-time faculty, what I call adjunct, they actually are two different groups that make up this category. In the longer, one group that has been there for a long time are these professionals who have day jobs and they teach the occasional college courses. This was a very classic model in community colleges that had their focus on teaching sorts of work skills, practical, technical training. They had individuals, sort of specialized people in industries, specialized trade skills coming, teaching vocational schools. You also saw this in research universities, particularly in the professional fields. I mean, when I was in city planning, Becky, you mentioned I got my master's at Ohio State City Planning. We had this wonderful faculty member, Ralph Widener, who was, I don't know, he worked for federal government or one of the foundations, and he would teach a course in strategic planning or, I don't remember the exact title of it. And he was wonderful to me in making introductions to certain organizations in DC. You see those kind of appointments in law and business, it's quite common. And this continues, but it represents just a small share of the part-time faculty growth. The biggest growth in part-time faculty has come from academics who would rather have a full-time academic job, but settle for part-time teaching because tenure track, full-time positions are going unfilled. And so as new PhDs graduate, don't find those, they end up in part-time positions. This, the adjunct professor crisis, if you will, was really most severe, has been seen most severely or most intense in the humanities, because these were the fields, literature, English, arts, languages, where the greatest cuts took place during when universities were retrenching. And the conditions, we all know, are very dire. I mean, this group of faculty is typically paid per course. A survey by AAUP in 2018-2019 found that the average compensation per course for a 3-credit semester length course was under $4,000. So, assume a full course load of 8 courses. I mean, that makes what, $32,000 per year. And many of these faculty are cobbling together, teaching stints at different schools. And it's not surprising that currently many humanities part-time faculty in many institutions are beginning to unionize for better pay and benefits. But I'll sort of just mention that. But this is the group that has been growing the most rapidly. The third group is what I call the full-time non-tenure track faculty. And this group is the most recent growing group, I mean, they have titles like lecturer or clinical professor, academic professor. There's a huge host of titles. Their growth was a direct outcome of this rise in part-time adjunct teaching. Again, after 2009, the recession following 2009, the growth of part-time faculty took off and there began to be real concerns. One, social justice concerns about their conditions, but as much about what it means for student success and what kind of an education students are getting with faculty who are simply there part of the time. And there's been a lot of headlines in the Chronicle. I mean, some of my favorite headlines were the university is a ticking time bomb and core academic values threatened. So what it meant was universities now began to find ways to stabilize these adjunct appointments. and began investing in full-time positions with benefits, multiple year contracts, which allowed for some sort of predictability of staffing, a continuity necessary for program growth and curriculum planning. So we began to see these full-time positions grow. Again, they were not new to academia. At Ohio State, I mean, back in the 1980s, there was one lecturer. I don't know if any of you remember or have met Vera Herman. She was a teaching professor. I TA'd for her and was one of the most amazing teachers, a great mentor to me. So those positions are not unknown, but now they're becoming much more formalized. And so today, when you look at this new growth of the full-time non-tenure track faculty, besides the fact that they have benefits, multiple year contracts, and are full-time, what really distinguishes them from the tenure track conventional model faculty is that these faculty typically have very specialized workloads. The vast majority of full-time non-tenure track faculty tend to be teaching focused with titles like lecturers, clinical faculty, instructors, sometimes just assisting professor. But we also see research focused non-tenure track faculty, and particularly in the sciences, where often they're sort of a more stable version of postdocs, because just as postdocs come for 2 or 3 years, but with the kind of investments in research and longer term running of labs and training of graduate students and postdocs, we're seeing an investment in junior faculty that have only teaching research responsibilities. And then there are some service-focused full-time faculty as well. They run study abroad programs, they manage labs, they may run field studies, advising clinics. So there's a whole host of faculty that do teaching as well as this sort of administrative management. What absolutely, though, has to be noted that despite the fact that these full-time positions are being rationalized as benefits, we still have a very unequal picture of the tenure faculty worlds and then the non-tenure track faculty worlds. In terms of salaries, in terms of benefits may be similar, but opportunities for recognition, travel, and so forth. The possibility of making a jump from the non-tenure track full-time to the tenure track, I have seen few cases of it, but they are very idiosyncratic. Once you're in a teaching only or research only position, mounting the kind of sort of CV or application letter for a tenure track position becomes increasingly difficult. So just want to make sure I point that out. So let me move to the what's happening now, what can be expected to the future. And this is, I've kind of put some speculation, some reality, but here's one thing that is happening. We are seeing universities absolutely ratcheting up their investment in the full-time non-tenure track faculty, this group that I just talked about that like lecturers and clinical faculty. Since about 10 years ago, maybe even less than 8, since for the last 7 or 8 years, we're seeing structured promotion paths. So this is just an example from titles that Georgia State University uses for promotion paths for our non-tenure track full-time faculty. our university was a leader in this, and it was about 2013 or 2014 that we created the promotion manual for non-tenure track faculty, and more universities are doing that. And the titles vary, but the process is very similar to the promotion for conventional model faculty member. You may not have external letters, but the paths are very similar. So this is one of the kind of investments we're seeing. We're seeing more and more universities giving travel funds, recognitions, awards for non-tenure track faculty. My office, my ex-office, Office of Faculty Affairs, now has recently hired someone who is a faculty associate for non-tenure track faculty, just looks after non-tenure track faculty affairs. It's the first time we've had that. Greater committee representation. I mean, and this is something at Georgia State, I keep on saying University of Georgia, my GSU colleagues would be very annoyed at me. At Georgia State University, 2 members of our high-powered Faculty Governance Association, the University Senate, their executive committee made up of 5 members. 2 of them are non-tenure track faculty. So they are in positions of high influence. I think at least 2 of our associate deans of colleges are in non-tenure line positions. So this is becoming more and more less unusual, let's put it that way. And I say, what's in a name? You know, in the faculty affairs world, when I meet with these faculty affairs professionals, one of the biggest area of discussion is what do you call your what is it name you use? Because we're realizing that non-tenure track faculty is really defining a big group, important group of faculty by what they are not. So coming up with newer terminology, and there's just a little story on the side. I was involved in one of those academic program review at another institution, just to see how these persist. And the dean of that college came and met with us and was giving us a little bit of introduction to that department we were going to review. And she says, well, they have 12 faculty and 4 lecturers. And, you know, I said, do you mean in your university lecturers are not considered faculty? And then she quickly, no, of course they're faculty, but, and I actually looked up, you know, lecturer and faculty, and believe it or not, there's in one of the places I read the definition, it said a professor is a leading expert in the teaching institution. A scholarly teacher, whereas a lecturer refers to someone who delivers a lecture. So we have work to do here, you know, and what is in a name does become important. The shift, you know, this promotion track for full-time faculty, interestingly, is opening up. And I put a little, you know, this is all unproven. This is just me seeing the hiring packages. Part-time faculty in the past, adjuncts who had no chance of landing a tenure track position, are now seeing an opportunity to move into some of these full-time positions because they don't require necessarily a research portfolio, particularly if you're going for, you know, a lecturer teaching, a clinical professor, and your part-time teaching does give you the credentials and the ability to show this off. So I, in recent years, saw a lot of hiring packages for non-tenure track starting rank faculty that were previously adjuncts in that department. So that, you know, whether this really is a big move or not remains to be seen, but it's just something that there is a path here as well. And here I'm going to try and go quickly because this is where I start going down the rabbit hole a little bit, so stay with me. You know, so far we have absolutely knitted together the idea of tenure with a particular type of workload. Is it possible to separate those two out? So can you be in a tenure track position and have this sort of balanced workload like the conventional model? But perhaps could we open up tenure track teaching positions or tenure track research focused positions, which are not just for these eminent research professors who have gone at great height, but assistant research professors. And as we think about the most specialized needs of academia in sort of teaching, research, and to some extent service, although I don't include it here, this starts becoming more of a reality. Teaching faculty need as much of tenure protections as do teaching and research faculty. As a department chair, I often, I'm thinking of the opportunities this opens up. As a department chair, I remember years ago, we would always have a high demand from students for regional courses. Becky, you mentioned, or Darla, you mentioned, region as something you all are discussing. Every student, I want a course in geography of Latin America, geography of this. Yet in hiring and tenure track positions, we were all very aware that this is not where the discipline's going. We don't hire people anymore based upon the regional specialization. However, if you're hiring now teaching lines separate from research lines, that affords the opportunity to be more creative in how you meet your teaching needs, and similarly for research focus as well. You've got faculty that are every year, year after year on research grants. Might they be better moved into research tenure track positions and then create an opening for teaching tenure track positions? So all kinds of possibilities could open up if we separate those two. It might also help us redefine what these full-time, non-tenure track positions are. No longer are they just these sort of service, of second-tier service positions that are second to these sort of glorious conventional model tenure track positions. Now you have full-time faculty positions that may be time delimited, but used for very specific institutional goals. We're seeing already 2-3-year faculty, almost like teaching fellowships, that where you bring in faculty from diverse backgrounds and they teach, but they also work together as a cohort. They're given professional development opportunities with the hope that they may be competitive for a tenure track position in your institution or elsewhere. You can think of other creative ways in which these short time delimited full-time non-tenure track positions could play if all your faculty, regular teaching faculty and research faculty are afforded the protection of tenure. And I am seeing, University of Georgia, my previous institution, had a tenure track faculty hire in geography this was about 8 or 9 years ago. Several institutions are now moving. This is not as unusual as it used to be. And perhaps to get myself the farthest on the limb here, it seems to me that we as a faculty have to begin to rethink or take charge of what we mean by tenure, what it is and what it isn't. For the longest time, and tenure, or not the longest time, but one of the reasons tenure emerged was a guarantee of academic freedom. And that guarantee is more important now than ever before, given what our society is like and the deep divisions in our society. That guarantee of academic freedom is critical today. At the same time, I increasingly in my conversations with faculty sort of hear tenure interpreted as I can do whatever and they can't fire me no matter what. And then no matter what might be, I don't really have to, I haven't done research for some years. My students, I'm ineffective in the classroom. Nobody wants me to serve on the committee, or chair a committee, but they can't fire me. And this is something we as a faculty are protecting because we are so fearful of the erosion of tenure. And I sort of put a question mark there. Is that what tenure means? And we are now seeing the erosion of tenure is real. We are seeing, university systems, governor's offices, legislators taking whacks at tenure. I mean, at my own institution, right now we're embroiled in this debate where the university system of Georgia is putting more teeth in the post-tenure review. Instead of doing it every 5 years, do it every 3 years. There's a whole, I won't get into that. And faculty are very fearful, understandably, because of the lack of confidence in the system, very fearful that this is an erosion of tenure. Putting aside that fear of the trust issue, is it out of line to expect a certain level of productivity of our faculty? And I just leave that as a question, or do we defend tenure no matter what and ignore that we are right now in an unequal system? A lot of our colleagues don't have tenure. They are walking on eggshells because they don't have that protection. And where I'm just going with it is my invitation to faculty, and not necessarily just those on this Zoom call, but in general, is that we can't just be in a defensive posture when it comes to tenure. You're saying, no, what are you? Don't do that. We really have to take charge and begin defining for ourselves in this new environment where the supply of faculty exceeds the demand for faculty. What and how do we define it? How do we stand by it? And how do we take charge and not be dictated to? So that's I'll stop. It literally is a rabbit hole. I'll stop there. And I take just a couple of minutes for some takeaways for those of you that are graduate students on this call, or students. Just a few pieces of advice. Become familiar with what's happening in higher ed, certainly within geography, but also beyond. I mean, Inside Higher Ed is a publication that's free, online, provides short and easy pieces on what's happening in higher ed. The world we have at Ohio State is a very, very specialized slice of higher ed, and it is not the norm. So keeping that in mind. Learn about how the university works. There's so many positions outside of the teaching and research positions. PhDs, their entry-level positions for PhDs in all fields, and centers for teaching and research, and student success offices and admissions offices. So there's many other academic entry points for those of us who want to stay in the university setting, if teaching in the classroom isn't the most important thing for you. And then think of the ways in which many skills you've developed over the years in academia and out could be relevant. I mean, this could be, you might have worked with students that are diverse. You might have been in some kind of community organization where you had to organize, run a budget, write proposals. These skills are extremely important for the new types of emerging jobs. And for those of you that are faculty on this call, prepare your doctoral students for a wider array of positions, give them experience in, being on committees that assess programs, maybe manage budgets, do fundraising, strategic planning. Give them an opportunity to be engaged in this. Maybe expose them to professionals academics in other non-tenure track positions. When for our undergraduates, we often sort of bring these people from industry, from different types of industries, say, these are the different types of jobs you could get with a geography degree. What about for our doctoral students, where we bring in academics from community colleges or tech colleges or four-year institutions and share the kind of work they do and what gives them passion? Think about how our departmental practices may reinforce this two-tier system. Who sits in faculty meetings? Who sits on important committees? These are all, how do we engage with one another? There's so many examples I could give here, but I'll stop. And then be engaged in your college, university, or faculty governance conversations on tenure, on what these creative future models may look like. Thank you all for that, for your attention. I'll sort of wish I could be there. And Becky, I hope I've left enough time for some comments and conversations.
Yes, thank you so much, Kavita. So we can all give our applause, which is like, the hard part in this. We can't really do that so easily. What I would like to do at this point is to open up the floor. For one, it would be wonderful to have people turn on their cameras at this point, whether you plan on speaking or not, just so that we can, see faces, and so Kavita can see who's here.
If you're not lying in bed or
right, if appropriate.
Love to see your faces. Yeah.
And if you have questions or comments, because we had talked about trying to integrate a little bit more of the informal piece that we would normally get with a visit. So questions or comments, and in the past we had talked about wanting to start with a graduate student, so we'd really like to do that again if possible, is to see if there are any comments or questions from graduate students who would be willing to
pressures on grad students.
Yeah, we'll leave some quiet for a moment. While people are thinking about that, I'll just say that we are right now thinking about these full-time non-tenure track positions both in the university and the department, so that seems to really hit home on that one.
Hi, this is Anissa. We had like a little listening party in our office, so I'm speaking from Katie's computer.
Okay.
But I guess one of my questions is, given the incredible competitiveness of the job market and like the kind of truth that we all know about how difficult it is to get a tenure track position, like what does that mean for admissions in terms of admitting people to graduate programs, knowing that like in some cases we're training them for jobs that don't really exist?
That's an awesome, what does it mean for admissions? And the question you're asking has particularly consumed the faculty in the humanities, and for a while in law as well. It has been less, I've seen it less in the geography or social sciences circle where it's not so dire. So two comments. One is there is no reason that the only thing graduate school prepares you for, even a PhD, is a teaching and academic job. And that is one of the reasons I thought to work in the idea that there's a whole host of other very satisfying positions within academia that I was just oblivious. I had no idea that that PhDs go on to student success. They don't call them professors, but I was administrators that work with students and on metrics and so forth. So there is a whole host of other positions. That's one. There are jobs outside of academia. The challenge really comes from when students have a passion. I mean, again, I revoke the humanities. People feel a calling. I want to learn about Chaucer. That's why I'm coming to grad school. I'm not coming here for to find a faculty job, although obviously that would be nice. So the question for graduate admissions is, do we disallow students who want to come here to learn? And this is a passion. What I would say is that we have to be very transparent about placements. Where do our students end up? How many of them didn't? And this is the kind of data grad students entering maybe a doctoral program should be asking. So that, I don't know if that answers your questions, Anissa, but there are important questions to be asked about admissions. And my feeling is be transparent and allow the student to make their choice.
Questions, comments?
I have a question. Hi, Kavita. Nice to see you
Hi,
again.
Harvey. You TA for Vera as well. How nice.
And she was an amazing teacher. She could keep a room of 90 undergraduates riveted on whatever region she was talking about in the world when she was lecturing. Really, really amazing teacher. I have a comment and a question. One has to do with the weakening of tenure. At my last institution, they weakened tenure considerably by introducing something called tenured faculty review. And every 5 years, we had to send out a statement and a CV to external reviewers who commented on the person's research productivity. And the default was it was a renewal question, so you weren't going to be fired for not being productive, but it still technically was possible for the university to eliminate you every 5 years. When I was department chair, it was sometimes hard to get files reviewed because faculty at other universities would refuse to participate because they said, "What are you doing reviewing a tenured faculty? I just won't do this." I had people tell me that. So just a comment on some of the ways. I remember when I moved here and I was on the personnel committee, I mentioned this to Ed Malecki and he said, "Oh, so you didn't have tenure." That was his flat reaction to that tenured faculty review. Okay, here's my question. It had to do with the distribution of different types of duties among faculty. And you laid out like for tenure track, research and teaching, and then non-tenure track. I was wondering what you think about where administrators should come from. I mean, is the path to administration, well, you make it all the way through the full professor following the traditional model, you're a well-respected scholar, then maybe you move into administration, or is that something that starts earlier, like after tenure or even before tenure? And if so, how do we deal with that, as educators teaching PhD students? I mean, I teach my students to do research, and we do have this teaching and higher education certificate here at OSU. One of my PhD students is taking that right now. But what about that path? Because we do need, good scholars and good professors to be good administrators. We don't want to get all that just from the business world, and like it's increasingly popular at some universities, including this one. So I just appreciate your comments on that.
Yeah, both great questions. If I could just comment on your comment. This is the first time I've heard of external reviews for post-tenure. I mean, I don't think a post-tenure review is that, and it doesn't necessarily have to represent erosion of tenure. I mean, we all can use some, but having external letters, that just seems like increasing. I mean, so I was very surprised by that. And it is true that a post-tenure review can be one of the entry points to, my argument would be to strengthening tenure, because I feel tenure is stronger by the idea of tenure. Anything is stronger when you say, who doesn't deserve it? And why should you, if you aren't teaching, if you aren't doing research, why do you deserve academic freedom protection? So anyway, I won't go into that, but that was an interesting learning for me. On the administration side, and I'm kind of maybe taking it off a little tangent, so pull me back if you think. At one time, the path to, the path that I saw was, okay, you become assistant professor, you rise to the ranks, you become chair, you become a dean, you become a provost, and then go on to greater things. And that path may still be there as long as you're in that academic line where to be a dean, a chair, and a provost, you really need those academic creds. But what has really increased, even since I was in grad school, is a number of administrative positions. We all have heard administrative bloat. Well, yes, there's administrative bloat, but it's a bloat that's come from compliance, regulations, it's come from student success. There's just been so much leveled on universities that faculty will not be able to do that kind of a job. And the entry points to that are much more flexible. You don't have to have gone through the ranks for that. So when I was at UGA, we hired an associate dean of students in the arts and sciences who was a PhD. And maybe she taught adjunct in one of the departments, but she was associate dean, worked on student affairs entirely. Now she's a vice provost at University of Georgia. And so a lot of these vice provost, associate deans, student affairs, there's so many international education, another pathway where you can come in as a study abroad advisor, get your PhD along the way, become an associate provost. So if your question was, what does that mean for the education we deliver for our PhD? That's a more difficult question because the PhD reflects a certain corpus of knowledge in our discipline. And it's governed by different metrics than what the demand for labor in the university is. But as long as we are learning quantitative techniques, we're learning how to teach. I think academic PhD training inherently prepares us for a range of jobs in academia. So I don't see a need for necessarily switching that up unless we add a geography ed degree, which is a teaching only degree. I hear that sometimes come up, but I don't know if we need to change what we teach, but I do think we need to point ourselves or our students to a different range of positions out there. I hope I came close to answering what you were asking, Harvey.
I think you have. I would also comment that, that's another reason to involve students in governance and some of the departmental processes so they could see how the sausage is made before they have to make it themselves.
Yes.
To some degree.
And I'm reading a text, a thing. Yes, I have I was trying to bracket my presentation to have one message, but the idea of privilege, diversity is absolutely a kind of alongside. So Alejandro, thank you for raising this. You've got a lot of words in there, some of which I don't know exactly how to grapple with, but it is so true that there, I have to say Ohio State, is reflective of this. When I was a grad student, Vera Herman was the only female faculty. There was, I think Nina Lamb came in at one point, but I had zero interactions with her. It was predominantly Caucasian, entirely Caucasian, British dominated, maybe it still is. And even as a graduate student, there was it took me a long time, much later, that I wasn't in that environment. I realized, wow, I'm in a different place now. So I think Ohio State gave me all the opportunities, but I didn't quite feel as equal as the others. And I'm being very blunt here. Sort of there was a very place for me, especially kind of a slight colonial flavor there. So there is a whole other debate and not debate, a conversation on how we hire, how we retain. And what the positive thing is, more and more universities, I mean, I think all universities now are putting in place what we call inclusive hiring processes, retention, how do we create community? So those conversations have begun. There is restructuring, the fact that the part-time, non-tenure track faculty in relative terms have higher shares of faculty of color is a reality. I'm only heartened by the fact that the work has begun. And maybe for some universities, it just began in the last year with all the conversations coming out of the summer of 2020, but it has begun. So Alejandro, I hope that kind of gives you a little sense of hope, but there is work to be done.
And for those of you who aren't reading the chat, Nancy
Yes.
says that she was the first tenure track woman hired in the department. And when was that, Nancy?
Sorry, 1988.
1988.
Yes.
So you and Kavita just missed each other.
We
All
missed
right.
each other. I think Nina Lamb I don't know if she was tenure track. She was there for a while. She may have left for Louisiana State prior to your joining, but she was the only other female faculty member I recall. I mean, this is stories, but Ohio State particularly, has a legacy that I'm sure you all are working towards changing.
Well, it's interesting because of course it has these kind of two legacies, and I was actually hoping to ask you about that, and you've kind of addressed it already. But one is the kind of visible legacy of having graduated early people of color PhDs, the first Harold Rose being the first PhD in the United States to a Black person in 1960, and Ricky Sanders, one of the first women in 1980, I believe, and yourself. And we're having Marilyn Raphael come and speak in the spring. Hopefully she'll be able to come in person, we'll see. So there's like this visible, Ohio State did pretty well. And then, as you said, there was also, how did you put it? Colonial feel. So I think it's really that people don't necessarily know, or we have a sense that probably it wasn't as good as it looks, right? But we don't necessarily know. So I don't know if you want to say more, but thank you for at least addressing it.
I appreciate your pointing out those successes as well. And those are notable, and we should take pride in those as well. Yeah.
But which wasn't actually my point, but yes, we should take pride in those and we should acknowledge them. But my point is that can actually cover some of what isn't as good, right? And help and get people off the hook, which we don't want to do either. So.
Yes, and Emily, I'm looking at coming from Emily and then Liz and Jen. Emily, share with us your.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few things because I feel like I'm right in that position that you're talking about. I've been a senior lecturer here at OSU for going on 6 years. And we're finally, getting this assistant professor of teaching non-tenure track option open, and I'm hoping I get it. So plug for myself because the vote is on Monday. But I just wanted to say a few things. First, your talk was incredibly validating. And, I know you weren't speaking directly to me, but I feel like my contributions to the department of the university are very valuable. And I just wanted to say that was kind of an emotional reaction to your talk, and to thank you for that. I also wanted to say that your little story about how lecturers were in a different category than faculty, that did resonate a little bit. And it's a tiny thing, but I've noticed it all the years that I've been here. But my photo and the photos of other lecturers on a board outside the office are always under staff, and they've never under faculty. And so maybe that's something we want to reconsider in light of your talk, and hoping to make lecturers feel like they are a part of the faculty instead of reinforcing the fact that they're not every time they see their face on the board. So just a thought. And I really appreciate it as well. Just my third thought, final thought, your comment about academic freedom being the big point of tenure. Because when we think about it, we want academic freedom in what we research and how we research it. We want academic freedom in how we teach our classes. And if we're only reserving tenure for those who are doing both teaching and research, it makes you wonder, well, does that mean that there's some intersection where that academic freedom lies? You know, why is it not sufficient for someone who's just doing research to have academic freedom, that protection? Why is it not sufficient for someone who's doing exclusive teaching to not have that protection? What is it about being the triple threat where you do all teaching and service and research that's when you need the protection of academic freedom? An interesting thing to consider. So anyway, thank you so much for your talk.
You just echoed great comments. And I would say before the talk, I kind of thought I'd scan through the Ohio State faculty pages just to see, well, maybe do they have non-tenured faculty? And I didn't see any. And I said, well, maybe they don't. I didn't think to look under the staff listings.
Under the staff, that's right.
Thank you.
I noticed that Elizabeth and Jenny Zorn have left some comments.
I would love for them to
Wondering
unmute and
if they would like to say something.
could I take the privilege of having them unmute and make the comments? Liz, can you?
Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Pandit, it was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And the idea of academic freedom is absolutely fundamental before, now, and in the future too. So I'm thinking about the funding sources and where money comes into all this. So, you know, interesting how you talked about tenured faculty perhaps being pulled out of the classroom to engage in research, and some of that backfill coming from, you know, other types of professionals. Yeah. So what is the oversight for, you know, for this funded research? Is it peer-reviewed journals? Does any of that happen within the department that the research professor is where that he or she resides? So yeah, the whole idea of academic oversight, I appreciate the importance of funding and money. And anyways, so how does that oversight occur? Where does that live? Thank you.
Yeah, Liz may be a little bit out of my kind of comfort zone, but I'll take a stab. I mean, I don't think there's a single place. I think the university has, when a federal funding funder gives the university money, there's a full expectation that the institution will comply. I mean, you know, with human subjects, animal control, and all those compliance, budget, good stewardship. So that is the primary kind of, if you want to say, a supervision or oversight. And those funding agencies will pop in every so often, do audits. So that is what the answer that comes to mind. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you are thinking of, but that is the kind of compliance that comes to mind when I heard your question.
Yes, you know, and think again about the position of a chair, for example, you know, if the type of research focus that they're passionate about there, and then you get some large research funding that comes in that might not quite be compatible with that. Would the chair, for example, have any sort of opportunity to weigh in on what might be an appropriate type of a research project to pursue?
Theoretically, yes. I don't think I have any, dark.
No idea.
You're bringing in funds. It's in chemistry, sure. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and can I talk for one second?
Absolutely, Darla.
Specifically, I just did a site visit of a university that will not be named, but that has a huge slew of research professors, and it came up that, you know, all sorts of kind of issues with the sort of them having their, and then they're in their own building on top of that, right? So they're super productive, getting all these grants and working with loads of students and research subjects and whatnot, and it's just because they're in their own track, right? It's really impossible for colleagues to know all that's going on and to stay on top of it. So that was one of the things that our committee recommended to the chair was, hey, you need to build in some oversight. Particularly if soft money is driving their salary, there's a conflict of interest there too for the researchers, for them to police themselves.
Yep. Thank you, Darla. That's much nicer. Hey, Jen, you wanna pop in and ask your question? If she's still here, I don't see her.
Her box is here and she looks unmuted.
Jenny? All right.
Maybe not.
Well,
She can jump in whenever she would like. Anybody else?
any other questions? Oh, she's trying. Okay. But let me take a crack. So Jenny has served as the provost of 2 institutions. Yes. Jenny and I, you know, we've had these conversations about very often from up on high, there's a kind of edict that you will diversify, but at the departmental level, at least Jenny's example has experience that she shared with me is departments do their hiring in the old way. Oh, so-and-so is coming from this top rated, they're from Penn State, they're from Berkeley, and, you know, kind of, and I do hope that some of the inclusive hiring requirements that are now becoming more and more common start changing the departmental culture with respect to that as well. Becky, I see we're coming close to the end of the.
Yes. I want to see if there's anybody, one last question, comment.
I will, you know, but if please raise your hand if you have a last comment, but Becky, in your introduction, you mentioned that in addition to other stuff I do, I also sort of I'm trained as an executive coach, and just if any of you just want to call, have a conversation either on, you know, your career or a situation, I just invite you, just reach out to me, kpandit@gsu.edu. You can find me, or Becky can give you my number. I'd be just more than happy to schedule a time, talk about any of these issues if as they pertain to you. So don't hesitate to reach out.
From one OSU alum to the current OSU community. That's great.
Absolutely, open info.
That's super. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Kavita. So again, the kind of applause and thank you for coming. Remind people also that we have another talk. I believe it's in 3 weeks, and that is Nari Senanayake from the University of Kentucky, talking about her research in Sri Lanka, health issues, kind of political ecology of health in Sri Lanka. I don't have the title on me at the moment. So that's our next speaker. You're welcome to join Kavita if you'd like to come see more talks. So thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.